Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Sam Talman. I'm Director of Energy Services with Green Power Technologies Puerto Rico, and I'm joined today by my conversation partner, Tom King. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Sam, or good afternoon, I should say.
Good afternoon. Yeah. This is a bit of a Christmas special because we're flipping the script and we're going to be welcoming back our friend Gemaris Martes from Glen International. Hema joined us for the live forum conversation back on September 24th, where we were talking about the energy community. And because we're going to be releasing this segment on Boxing Day, we thought we would unbox some hot topics of Puerto Rico energy. But we're going to flip the script a little bit, and Hema's going to be interviewing us. So without any further ado, Hema, the floor is yours. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, and thanks, Tom, for
Welcome. No worries.
jumping over and, kind of peeking into this idea of kind of flipping it over and getting your thoughts on the energy topics that are pressing right now for Puerto Rico. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amaris Martes, and as Sam mentioned, I am the business development specialist for utility scale renewables and microgrids at Glen International. So I'm, seeking for the right solutions to help our clients and our partners build resilient and well thought energy projects here to support Puerto Rico. So I had this idea of, there's a lot of content already on the energy topic here in Puerto Rico, and especially the Puerto Rico Energy Forum led by Tom and Sam. They've created some very well thought and very interesting webinars, videos, even now like blogs and emails. And so I thought it would be a good idea to flip it over. And because they've been hosting these different events and getting insights from different stakeholders, kind of asking them for inputs and their thoughts on some of the pressing topics, like I mentioned, we have here in Puerto Rico. And so I think we're calling this segment like the white elephants in the room because it's Christmas time. But again, what we want to do is essentially highlight again those things that are definitely critical for us to make progress in the energy space here in Puerto Rico with everything that is going on. So we'll probably talk about some topics here and then eventually in the coming year do some reflections on the things that we discussed and see, which elephants remain big elephants in the room, white elephants or pink elephants in the room, and then continue this conversation hopefully down the road to hopefully unveil that there are some things that are changing and progress being made. But I want to start over with Tom. We had a conversation previous to this recording about what are those big things we really have to be paying attention and we should definitely not be distracted from that will make a big impact in us transitioning to a more reliable, sustainable, and affordable system here in Puerto Rico. So, Tom, in your mind, reflecting back in this year, what do you think is the biggest elephant in the room that we shouldn't forget about and we should be definitely all working towards solving as an island?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Hema, and it's nice to be interviewed. I'm usually the color guy, so I'll try to keep it up. Thanks. I think I've said this a lot, and I'll probably continue to say it. But right now, the PREPA being in bankruptcy is the biggest obstacle to moving on, to transitioning, to building up, to investment, to peace of mind, to almost anything and everything. It all kind of comes back to, well, we can't do this because PREPA is still in bankruptcy, and it filters all the way back. A couple of examples, there's been a lot of talk about the progress of spending the federal dollars that have been assigned. Well, the way that federal funding is most normally made, especially through states and others, is they approve a project, you go out, you build that project, and you spend money, and then they reimburse that money. So it's reimbursable. that works for everybody who's not in bankruptcy. But in bankruptcy, now you're working with limited amounts of cash and you cannot source working capital. The way that PREPA has provided working capital to Luma is basically through an initial amount that was allocated through the Commonwealth to PREPA and to its operations so that it could do this. And the other potential source would be through the tariffs that get charged for energy, which means that if you needed to build up additional working capital, then everybody's got to pay more for their electricity. Other utilities don't have this issue. If they're recovering from a storm, they simply borrow on their working capital lines. They spend the money and they get it back from the government. This has another big influence. It's not the only reason that Puerto Rico is currently in a deficit for energy. Well, it has thousands of potential megawatts of renewable and battery stations sitting on the sidelines. But without the solving of the bankruptcy and a very clearly defined system, there's very little interest from most credible developers and owners and operators of power stations to actually participate in the requests for proposals that are coming out. And you quite clearly see that in the people who are involved and the people who have, on the cusp of actually financing and funding the first stations are a combination of AES and Total, who already have investments on the island. So they're already vested. They understand and they feel comfortable with their investments. And the way that they're raising money for this through the loan program guarantees requires them to put their own corporate guarantee behind that payment. So this is all on balance sheet, and very few actually do that, which means that you requiring the lenders, the investors on the debt side to be happy with the risk structures, and they're not, because again, what's wrong? Well, PREPA's in bankruptcy. Take them out of bankruptcy, it becomes possible, expensive, but possible, and then you begin to move on. So those are just two big examples of major transition needs that Puerto Rico has that cannot move forward as long as they're still in bankruptcy.
Yeah, thanks for the thoughts. Sam, any additional thoughts on the topic of bankruptcy, and maybe potentially from both of you? Feels like we're sort of helpless here because we don't necessarily control the process of bankruptcy. We just keep reading over the news that everything gets like pushed to the right. Now we're hearing that it'll be beginning of next year until the mediation committee continues the conversations and potentially gets to an agreement. But in this sense of a little bit of hopelessness from us, in this side, what are any thoughts or potential solutions or ways we could potentially influence the process?
So before I touch on ways to influence the process, I think it's important to note that we've heard that before when it comes to here's the calendar to look forward to for negotiations from the different parties in the bankruptcy proceedings. And every couple of months, it feels like there's a new order by Judge Swain that says, you guys have to sit down and get it together, and we need a solution by name your month. And that month comes and goes, and we get to a new phase of stalemate here. So that's a challenge. I think we need to be optimistic about it, but at the other hand, I think it's very hard to have a reasonable expectation of future activity based on past performance, and so I think that's just something that we have to keep in mind and at the forefront. To your question, I think there's very little that anybody can necessarily do, with a couple of exceptions. We can get into those in a moment. I want to add to what Tom was saying with regards to kind of the base of the pyramid type of elephants in the room, because PREPA's bankruptcy is a big one. But I think we can also look at the policy and political angles that are going on here as well, that are creating additional, in line with the theme of our conversation, elephants. So we have a law that forces the closure of AES. And going back to PREPA's bankruptcy, it's very hard to get somebody in to fill that role. And we are going down a path of procuring thousands of megawatts of renewable energy solutions, which are very expensive as a result of an off-taker that is currently in bankruptcy. And so we are facing these dual crises of raising power costs, in some ways artificially because of the um, the different circumstances with regards to the negotiating parties. The cost of capital is high. Policy is mandating it. We have a rising demand of power and sort of forcing the generation to go down. All of these end up having major impacts on economic development. They make us lean far more heavily on federal funds as the source of economic growth, and all of that is tenuous. It doesn't fundamentally concrete the pillars of competitive growth that the Puerto Rico economy and the Puerto Rico society needs to be able to move to the next phase beyond bankruptcy, beyond these political changes that we're in the midst of right now. And so there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, is the bottom line.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
that is. Sorry, please
Mason,
go ahead,
I
Tom.
was just going to add to his thought. I mean, again, taking it back to bankruptcy and the way that it's slowing down the progress of replacing existing plants with renewable energy. You need utility scale. It hasn't slowed down. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's probably forced more people, federal government and others, to spend more money doing distributed power, microgrids and others. Although, as you know, microgrids have their own challenges, but they're still happening. And so it's a good and bad, but it's making Puerto Rico have to be likely more reliant on fossil fuels, for natural gas primarily, for a longer period of time in order to be able to have reasonably priced, reliable energy for the population to underpin the necessary economic growth and recovery that we all want to see in Puerto Rico.
That's such an important point, and I just want to mention here, which is something that we at the forum have been focusing on since its inception, which is good expectation management. And everything Tom just said leads us down to poorly defined goals that are poorly achievable, that end up being poorly achieved, which leads to confusion, political change, instability, all the other things that we're seeing. So it ends up really behooving everybody involved to clearly define our goals, clearly define a pathway to them, and articulate the challenges that are going to be faced along the way. We can't say that this is going to be easy and it's going to happen next year. It's going to happen in the next 4 years, and it's not going to cost money. All of those things set us up for a failure that is unproductive.
So we're kind of blending the first three elephants. We have bankruptcy and how it's definitely the base of the pyramid, right? Because it kind of leads to it. All these other different things we've been talking about, just to keep our listeners kind of on track with the number and different elephants we've been talking about.
That's right.
We have bankruptcy. We have the closure of the coal plant. Again, 2027, we will lose around, it depends on the day and the time that you're looking at this, but 16 to 25% of our current generation capacity after that plant closure. And again, for one side, we definitely have to move in that direction, but it's very frustrating and potentially concerning that we don't necessarily have a plan to replace that generation. Yeah. And so that was the second elephant we briefly touched on.
Least cost generation too.
Yes. Yeah. Not only is up to 25% of our generation capacity, it is the least expensive source of generation today. And when you look at your reliability or the forced outages, it's actually a pretty reliable source as well.
Yeah.
So, all of those things coming together is definitely a concerning situation that Puerto Rico will be in the coming 2 years. And as we were hearing recently on the GE Vernova event from La Alianza de Desarrollo Energético, it takes around 2 to 3 years to build a new power plant with aeroderivatives and whatever the technology ends up being. So
Yeah.
we're definitely on a tight timeline there. So anything else you would like to add regarding the second elephant in the room?
Yeah, I would just say with regards to the cost of AES's power generation, and we heard this articulated very clearly from Arnaldo Bisonó, the president of the Manufacturing Association's Energy Committee and business development manager at AES, talk about how the most expensive electricity is the power you don't have. And you would think, given the unreliability of power provision in Puerto Rico, we would be in a moment where we need power. And if people are, proposing legitimate projects to inject electrons into the system, we would do it at any cost necessary because we need the power. And we just saw the Energy Bureau 2 weeks ago reject a set of bids because of uncompetitive pricing. And my thoughts are the most uncompetitive pricing is the power we don't have, right? Going back to what Arnaldo was contributing. And so again, what are the goals here? Really, I think we merits better definition because we can say, well, if everybody gets off the grid, we have achieved 0% or 100% renewable, right? And if we have total defections and mass outmigration, and the grid no longer is no longer the stand-in for primary power, we can achieve our goals. But it ends up being one of these sort of dystopian AI outputs where you're like, oh, how do we achieve this? Well, you can kill all humans, and that ends up getting the job. It's like, well, that's not the we need to better define our goal. We need to better define the prompts so that we can get actionable kind of processes in place as opposed to some of these abstract ones. Like I think you're going to be hard pressed to find people who are really in favor of maintaining the coal operation online as the best alternative. On the other hand, it's better than not having power, and that's sort of what we're facing right now.
Yep.
Yeah. We also.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tom.
No,
Go ahead.
Tom, you said something. Tell us.
I was gonna switch over to a different topic. So if you want to continue closing thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do need to come back to political leadership, and we're going to need a lot of it. But yeah, I think that the closure of the coal plant, I mean, it's in law. AES wants to do it. There's going to be, I think, probably increasing pressure and some discussion about, hey, can we keep that open a couple more years? Is there a way of changing it? Waiving something in the legislation? I don't know, right? People are committed to getting this done. AES wants it closed. AES is not going to voluntarily come back and say, please, let's, we'd be happy to keep it back open. There's too much going on, but it could become a point of contention when we start heading toward to the next elections in Puerto Rico as this thing's going to close down. So, don't know.
Yeah, and you would think that because this deadline is approaching, we would be trying to push the Tranche 1 projects that we have and, that are already ongoing to different levels and different stages.
Yeah.
But the first ones are being developed are in construction right now as we speak. And most of them will have standalone storage as well, along with the solar power plant. So you would think that we would be kind of doing everything we can and everything in the political power to get those connected. But, that's another topic for another day. We don't necessarily see it happening that way. So along the lines of political leadership, that was another elephant in the room we wanted to touch on. So Sam, would you mind sharing your thoughts on this one and why you think it's one of the things we have to highlight in today's chat.
Yeah. So, and it will already have aired by the time this comes out, but we're going to have an upcoming conversation with Eduardo Batia on the most recent political changes and what their implications are, and also sort of a 10-year reflection since Act 57 of 2014, because I think that's been it requires reflection on what went well and what could be improved upon for the next decade. I think one of the things that has really become a positive out of that is the Energy Bureau, and having an independent regulator is best practice. It's a benchmark type of activity. It makes Puerto Rico, going back to the economic development point I was making a moment ago, makes Puerto Rico a viable destination for external capital. Having the semblance of level heads that are outside of the counterparty. Right, that goes a long way to make the market viable for energy projects. I think the political leadership that we need to see and we need to support in strengthening itself is defining our goals. Going back to the ADE presentation, there were comments about, is 100% renewable the right goal? And particularly, I think everybody is sober about the idea that 40% renewable by 2025 is just not, we're not even close. It's not viable. We have set ourselves up to fail with that regards. We've set a goal and basically done nothing towards achieving it in a realistic way. And I think that beggars the question of, okay, is it time to rethink what those goals are and really have a different eye towards defining them? Is it net zero at the end of the day? Is it more efficient generation? But what is it that we're trying to achieve by achieving 100% renewable? Is a question that we can have 100% renewable, but I think the so what needs to be answered here, and how obviously needs to be answered, because if we're doing hundreds and hundreds of megawatts of, for instance, battery storage projects with federal funds, how are we thinking long term about the sustainability of these projects from an economics point of view? We need power rates to go up, quite frankly, to sustain the utility as it currently operates. And I think this is another area of political leadership that we should be expecting. Governor-elect Jennifer Gonzalez definitely has made it clear that there's going to be greater fiscalización, auditing of the Luma contract, and so I fully believe that there's ways to encourage them to operate more efficiently, where they don't have to be at $132 million revenue insufficiency. But I think also just on a more intangible level, leadership needs to be able to articulate that this is a long-term project. Rebuilding the grid is a decades long project, and power rates will go up. Dark days are ahead of us. I mean, that sounds Churchillian, but I think that there's some sense of Puerto Rico is going through a period of austerity, and austerity costs money. Austerity is hard, and tightening your belts is uncomfortable. But it's something that if we're going to get into a better place of operational stability and continuity, we have to get out of the operational culture that has been in place for decades and has been changing, but there's a mass resistance towards that shift. And there's a political seesaw with regards to making sure that everybody feels attended to in a way that at the end of the day, if hard decisions need to be made, they need to be made articulately. And so I think that we need to rethink what it means to be working towards 100% renewable. I think we need to redefine intermediary goals. I think we need to redefine what is required to get there. And again, what our goals are, because we can do 100% renewable, but at what cost? It's not going to be at any cost necessary. The people and businesses and manufacturing facilities in Puerto Rico will not carry that burden of any cost necessary. They'll find a different way to do it, and that is good for them, and potentially not good for the rest of the grid and the rest of the people who just physically can't disconnect rather. So I think that's something that's going on that needs to be attended to by political leadership. I would say one other thing here, which is economic development needs to have a strategy that is not necessarily unmoored, because federal funds are available and they need to be used properly, but it can't be the extent of the strategy. And just going back to that battery project, how do we make sure that beyond the 20-year, 10 or 20 year, I forgot what it is, service agreement for those, there's something in place so that the utility can keep us from going back to square one, which is, okay, now we just have a stranded assets in these formerly stranded assets, right? They're putting these battery plants in decommissioned generation facilities. Great. I love redevelopment. I think brownfield development is a great use of our time and energy.
Yep.
But in 20 years, we have to make sure that those are not just stranded batteries, because we haven't thought about the long-term capital strategy to keep them operating, to maintain them, to replace them if need be. And federal funds, the federal funds we spend today are not going to be the federal funds we spend in 20 years, and we can't forecast what federal funds those will be. And so we need to have a more robust strategy independent of the federal government. There's another.
I mean, Sam, if in 20 years we're still in bankruptcy and we don't have an effective credit-worthy counterparty as a utility, then we probably will be right back there. But I can't. No matter how depressed you want to be about all of the elephants in the room, stomping on all your hopes and dreams, it's we've got to imagine that I thought we'd be here now, but we got to imagine 20 years from now, and in fact 15 years from now, that the planning process will kick in and you'll be having discussions about renewing, revitalizing, or extending agreements, or doing things as part of a regularized plan. Remember, this is all new for Puerto Rico. We talked about Batia coming in, and we talked about Act 57. Well, that's when the regulator first started. I mean, there wasn't a regulator, there wasn't a regulated industry. So it's a lot of drinking from a fire hose in terms of learning, and also you're talking about people who I think are doing a great job. But there's just too much to do. The list of things that have to be done yesterday are enormous. But I can say with some amount of optimism that I think in 20 years that they'll be able to do it.
I'm going to put you both a little bit on the spot here, because I really want to hear from you. We talk about political leadership, right? We talk about focusing. We talk about making strides on certain things that are medular to us making progress. So regardless of what happens in the next month, we know we're recording this a little bit before when it'll be up online. But in your minds, what are success stories, thinking 4 years from now in this political term? What would make you feel like this was a very successful political term in terms of solving key aspects of the energy space? Like, think 4 years from now,
Sure.
What would you like to see for Puerto Rico? We can focus on two or three of those things that we have together solved in this upcoming 4 years from a political leadership standpoint.
Well, we've got to be out of bankruptcy for PREPA. Hopefully well out of bankruptcy, maybe even to the point where PREPA and what's there can actually access the capital markets again. That may be pushing it for 4 years. I think, demonstration of political leadership, you're going to need to see a demonstration of political leadership in order to attack that bankruptcy, right? It's kind of been very much hands off, figure out what things happen. It needs to become a priority. It needs to be, God damn it, why isn't this frickin' done? And what do I need to do? And whose butt do I need to kick? We didn't get into detail. This is a particularly perniciously and a weird bankruptcy for PREPA. These are revenue bonds. These are a pledge of general revenues of the thing, and there are billions and billions and billions of revenue bonds in the municipal bond market. And they had a later ruling saying, no, they still have the thing. They still have a claim on the revenues. So much of it early in the earlier part was just, now we're just going to get rid of the claim. We're going to go through just a normal bankruptcy in terms of not paying. A later appeals court in the first district said, no, you can't do that, which the municipal bond markets all loved. But nobody really wants to grab that third rail and force and figure it out. So everybody has in the municipal bond market, and certainly for the federal and the SEC and everybody else is looking at this and thinking, wow, if nothing actually happens about this, then it's probably good. Better to leave it where it is, and they'll muddle through and figure it out. Puerto Rico political leadership, Jennifer, has really got to make this a priority and push it through and say, come to a settlement, figure this out. It's like we cannot make the perfect the enemy of the good. We need to protect the people, and we need to protect economic development. But frankly, a far less than perfect deal done quickly is much better than a deal not done, or a deal that maybe is perfect in 6 or 7 years time. So that's a big one, and it's really going to need some pushing. The other thing I would love to see is from political leadership and having to do really with data and understanding. Everybody can have a different idea of what we should be doing, but I don't really think it's a good idea for everybody to have a different idea of how things are actually working, and what the facts are and how this is happening. And it's all over the map with the politicians, and they seem to make things up in a way that isn't true. So if we can get people to kind of agree on a basic set of energy, this is the way energy works, this is the way investment in energy works, this is what happens when you do this, then that's fine. Then you can have a nice political argument over, should it be a private system, a public system, should it be a mix, what do we do? So I'm not holding my breath, but I think as a first thing we've discussed, we've got to get people more or less on the same page about what's going on, how things are structured, what the effects are of doing things in a certain way, and from there we can have a fairly rational decision and discussion around what steps to take. So that would be a successful administration in my mind in 4 years' time.
Those are two good ones for sure. Sam, what are yours?
I think one tangible thing that can be done is looking at civil service reform. And this has broad-reaching implications. Puerto Rico has over 500 per 10,000 employees that work for the government. It's the highest publicly employed jurisdiction in the United States. And there are ways where that can be made far more agile. And at the same time, by definition, reducing the burden on the private sector to support that very, very weighty public sector. So I think one of the things that we talk about regularly is, okay, certain agencies of great import don't have the resources they need to be able to operate at the highest capacity they could. And at the same time, we have the greatest, in terms of number, public sector in the United States. Those two things don't gel, and we need to make sure that we are getting more agile where we can, so that we can dedicate resources and allocate resources appropriately to getting the things we need done. And there are comparable jurisdictions in terms of population that operate with a fraction of the agencies, state and local agencies that Puerto Rico has. If we're talking about limited resources and great ambitions and aspirations, we need to make sure that we're serious about achieving them. And in my mind, if we're in an energy crisis, we need to treat it like an energy crisis, and we can no longer just give lip service to it, but we need to dedicate the resources to the Bureau that it needs to be able to achieve what it needs to achieve. We need to dedicate resources to the governor can appoint certain leadership roles within PREPA and PRASA and other major state agencies to be able to achieve goals. We need to get out of our own way. And that comes from a political leadership standpoint. One of the things I'd like to see is we have 130 plus state level agencies in Puerto Rico. I'd like to see that halved, right? And this is part of the belt tightening that I mentioned a moment ago with regards to, if we're serious about achieving our goals, let's act seriously about achieving them. And if it's an energy crisis, let's be on crisis footing. Let's act like it's a crisis, as opposed to say it's a crisis for political gain and then do very little about crisis management. In the last couple of days, this has been something that I'm happy to have heard bits and pieces of from the Gonzalez campaign. We'll see, right? The proof is in the pudding, and we need to make sure that these trends are not only defined, because it's very easy to say we're just going to do things better and you'll know it's good because it's good, and that's not good enough. we need to see tangible movement. Puerto Rico is the highest tax jurisdiction in the U.S. and for businesses to be burdened by this huge public sector, and at the same time having way too high of cost, low quality public services like energy, means that we are going to continue to see an outmigration. So we need to reduce the burden to pay for a hefty public sector, and we need to make it easier for businesses to find the solution for them. Ideally, the primary source in the grid is available for them, but if need be, and in many cases the need is there, to have a backup or a different primary source, they can dedicate resources that are previously going to over multitude of state level agencies. They can actually go towards investing in the business. If we're going to see utility revenues go up, we need a private activity to go up. We need people to be on the grid. We need people to be paying taxes, and we need those taxes to be going towards making sure that services are provided in a mutually beneficial way. So that if I could define success, it would be making the central level government more agile, working with municipalities to take greater control over what are currently central government mandates, and reducing the burden on the private sector so that they can either attend to their energy needs or be more successful. When we see economic growth, we see energy demand go up. When energy demand goes up, the utility gets more revenues. When the utility has more revenues, they can dedicate more to operations, maintenance, expanding services, expanding operation generation, and more smart technology to improve outage response, vegetation management, all the things that we've seen as priorities from Luma and Genera. That requires the private sector to have buy-in, and at the moment there's a huge burden on their shoulders.
Yeah, I mean it's a bigger issue, but it actually it has implications across the economy of Puerto Rico. But the tax burden falls much more highly on the middle class in Puerto Rico. The energy poverty that we talked about before in terms of storms and outages, etc., interestingly falls much more heavily on the poor. But there is a lot of money that's actually going in. That's a place where we're actually making progress. The FOMB is still on the agenda, but they've taken forever to get around to it. Is the government reform that Sam was just talking about. Now, hopefully we can do that. Hopefully we can see that happen. There are way too many people not actually providing services that are just on the payroll of the government. It's not efficient. The FOMB actually made I don't know if it was actually verbalized, but in the earlier days, to avoid too much austerity, they did not make major cuts in the number of employees in the overall government. If you were to drive up unemployment at that time by basically firing a bunch of government employees, it would have had a difficult effect at that time. Now not the case, right? Now you can do it bit by bit. You can do it and stimulate efficiency in operation, contribute back, hopefully reduce the burden, streamline operations and efficiency, and more than anything else, really, from an economic development, for the middle class, if you want to think about that as the engine, you lower the uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen, and that feeds directly into their thoughts about energy and investing in that, and investing in microgrids, investing in other types of things. They'll have a lot more confidence in in what's going to happen, and that data, that investment, that also feeds back into planning for what's the demand going to be, who's going to be around, what do we need to do, where do we need to make or prioritize the investments in the grid when we get the money, when we have the working capital to get the money in order to invest in it. You're going to look to be making those investments into places where the private sector is making investments. So
I think one more point here, and this goes to the civil service reform and what Tom was just saying as well,
yeah.
which is the next administration needs to articulate success, and and just as an example here, I think Puerto Rico's government revenues this year are the highest they've been in 10 years.
Yeah.
It's not something you would hear. It's not something we hear or feel, and that is, well, not the whole of the story. Something that needs to be articulated because it matters, and it needs to be put in the context of, we have work to do, and here's what we've been able to achieve. It's something that all three of us, I think, have been hounding Luma for. Is like, look, we have your back. We need you to articulate your success. Shout it from the rooftop. Share it with us so that we can shout it from the rooftop. Same thing with Genera. We need these entities to be successful, right? And for them to be successful, we need them to not just make progress, but then share that progress with their stakeholders, and their stakeholders are the people of Puerto Rico. And that goes a long way to make. We can't just say, "Don't you feel the progress? It's everywhere," and be insensitive to the fact that there's many people who do not feel the quote unquote progress. So the progress, the success needs to be put into a context, but it does need to be articulated.
Yeah. No, I think getting that investment, right? I mean, to me, it still comes back to bankruptcy, because we got to get the funds flowing. We got to get working capital. We get working capital in Luma or whoever is doing it. If you're of that persuasion, you've got to be able to invest in the grid, which means you got to do so. All the money that has been put up to rebuild the grid through FEMA and through various acts, that's waiting, right, to be planned and spent and reimbursed, is aimed at doing a lot of things in order to very nicely reorient the grid toward the distributed nature of energy, et cetera, that's going on. That's terrific. But where it really makes sense is that there are enormous line losses associated with operations on the grid, like crazy line losses. And what that means is that you have to generate that much more energy, because between generating that energy and delivering it to the customer who pays for what happens at their meter, there are line losses throughout. It's low-hanging fruit if you have the $1 billion that you need in order to make those improvements over a couple of years. But if you're talking that the renewable energy is going to cost 2 or 3 cents more per kilowatt, and we need more money to invest in things, where is that going to come from? If you can invest in the grid and lower your line losses, then you don't have to pay as much for generation, because you're not losing as much. That could mean 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cents in savings at the end. That is currently it's just released as heat effectively in the grid, and goes to ground and never reaches a customer, so it's never paid for. These are ongoing inefficiencies that are still there because we don't have capital, we don't have, the investment is still on the sideline, et cetera. But it's one of the first things that was on the Luma agenda when they were planning what to do once they signed their contract and got underway. Remember, they're operating under a supplemental agreement. They haven't started their contract yet. Their contract starts when PREPA comes out of bankruptcy, and there's money there for them to start doing these things. So.
Yeah, if I may touch on that again, I feel like I talk, of course, most of my time I'm surrounded by folks that know more about energy than myself. But, once in a while, you chat about energy with other people that, in my opinion, are very well educated civilians here in Puerto Rico. And one of the key things that I feel there's least amount of knowledge out there besides this close energy circle is the fact that Luma is operating under this supplementary contract, and the fact
Right.
that they're not really into the real contract, and the reason being, again, bankruptcy. I feel like that specific data point is like lost in translation most of the time. So, hopefully that's another thing that we touch again upon, broadening this message
Right.
out of the energy circle of people, because I think it's one thing that really gets lost in the translation, and makes people kind of feel hopeless about why, isn't things moving fast enough? Why isn't Luma doing more than what they're doing? And the whole reimbursement aspect of it also gets really lost in translation.
Yeah.
So those are really great points that you bring up again.
And they're too convenient a political scapegoat, right? Because the alternative is, well, we screwed up. It's the politicians. We didn't get it right. We didn't tell you the truth before, and we don't want to tell you the truth now. So it's Luma's fault. Let's get rid of Luma. It's
Yeah,
easy.
it's easy and it's insane at the same time. It's like
Yeah.
it's one of those things
Yeah.
that I wish everybody really understood and knew about. So I know we're already here getting to the hour. We did have a few more elephants that we wanted to touch on. Maybe we have a separate session to kind of complete the list. But I would really want for us to end here on a short-term goal. And if you wanted people that will be listening to this recording later on for this upcoming year, right? We can't really do everything at the same time. For this upcoming year, what do you hope we all work together in solving? Again, the bankruptcy topic is very important, but not necessarily something we can control individually. But from the leaders that will be listening to this recording, or folks that will be listening, what in your mind we should all be teaming up and collaborating radically to solve the next year, this 2025, from all the elephants that you can think of?
Wow.
So
Sam, you go first.
I think, yeah, thanks, Tom. Throw the easy one my way. I think there's a couple things. One is we need to have, we need to, when we think about a renewable portfolio, it needs to be literally that, a renewable portfolio, and it cannot be strictly a stand-in for solar. I think that we need to have, and along that line, we need to encourage ourselves and everyone else to have renewed toleration for nuance. This is not, and that goes on to the solar board. It's not 100% rooftop. It's not 100% utility. It's not all natural gas, and none of. We have to get beyond that. We have to get beyond the finger pointing. We have to get beyond this idea that if AES stays on, everything's doomed, and if it goes away, then it's going to be replaced by 100% solar. We have to be more creative than that, and we need that creativity from the electorate. We need that creativity from the leadership of state level agencies, and we need it from our executives. And so I in this year encourage discourse. We need to have open conversation about all the scenarios, the alternatives, and I'm not encouraging this analysis paralysis where we study something to death, but we need to be able to recognize that the answer will lie in the gray area, and we have to be able to move forward with that without immediate blaming of somebody who may or may not be an obstacle, or some entity that may or may not be an obstacle in that path. I think with that we achieve a lot. We achieve we set the ground really nicely for us to achieve many of our goals. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think in ignoring bankruptcy and following on from that sort of thing, I think getting people to share the same basic facts, right? We've talked about different ways of do we communicate it? We've talked about, and this is internally or at various groups, is there a simple, here are the basic facts pledge and send it around and ask people, from legislators, governors, et cetera, to sign it, right? And publish it, maybe put it out there. And, obviously, shame is perhaps, too la vergüenza de los políticos in Puerto Rico is just not, doesn't exist. But the idea of getting something out there, getting people together, getting them on the same page, getting them to understand that we need data, we need to share information, and we need good data. We need agreement on that data across the spectrum of energy in all sorts of different ways. And that'll help form a basis for reasonable discussion and understanding, and hopefully maybe affect some of the things that Sam was talking about just now.
Let me add one more thing before we close here, which is on the bankruptcy there, and Hema, this is how you started our conversation. There are certain things that are not necessarily under control, like within control, within immediate, the ability to tip the needle one way or another. We need to have a plan in place for day one post PREPA bankruptcy. I have yet to see that, and we can have plans that don't necessarily make sense because PREPA's in bankruptcy yet. But when PREPA's out of bankruptcy, what are the plans that are implemented immediately? That's something that I look forward to the new administration compiling. I think that's critically important. We need to know where we're going.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. It may not be perfect, but and if the players start getting shuffled like Luma and Genera politically, that becomes much more difficult. But at the very least, you need a plan to get as quickly into, if not the capital markets, then maybe some sort of additional loans, government provided, different structures, difficult to do with probably the federal government, but maybe there's a way to more quickly get to the point of increasing the working capital or streamlining the planning process, because you don't have the same thing hanging over you. And now Luma is onto its actual contract, the one where it actually has goals and measures and other types of things. So. Yeah.
That's a great point. It almost feels like this has to be like a committee that, meets monthly and that we, make strides and has like an outline. I think this would be something that would make us feel less hopeless and more in control, if anything.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like you're saying, it'll definitely move the needle and not, that transition period not being as long as it may be if we are not really proactive and upfront.
Right. Yeah.
This was a great conversation. I took some notes and I'll draft something to share with you. We can then have a separate session, maybe the beginning of next year, to reflect on what we discussed today, see, how the political space is looking like in terms of solving some of these issues, and then talk about some other elephants in the room that we can all be addressing from our positions and our places. So thanks again for giving me the opportunity to interview both of you. It's always so interesting to listen to your insights and your different backgrounds. And I think, economic development, the financing and capital side of all of these issues, it's definitely very interesting. So thanks again for having me. And I hope we can continue this conversation some other time.
Absolutely, Hema. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Take care. Merry Christmas.